Welcome back. In this lesson, we are going to be covering pieces of quadratics, so the parts of parabolas that we're going to need to know. So, our first example, we're beginning with a basic parabola. Now, the thing to remember is all parabolas in standard form are in the form ax squared plus bx plus c. So, the a being the number that's with the x squared, so in this case it's just a 1. If it's not showing, it's 1. B being the number with the x, which in this case is 6. C being the constant or the number that's by itself, which is in this case 1. So here I've already pre-done the graph for you. But just to remind you of how we'd go about doing that, if you have your graphing calculator handy, you go into y equals, type in x squared plus 6x plus 1. Hit graph, and it'll also make that graph for you. Now, for the pieces, I'm going to start with the vertex being the minimum or maximum point of a parabola. Now you see a little formula there. Now for today, I'm not going to be too concerned about that formula. That's going to come back when we deal with word problems involving the vertex. What I'm concerned with is how can you use the table to find it? Now, I did start using the term of vertex in our last video. So I want you to remember the vertex was that center point that I had you identify. So if you go back to your calculator and go second table to get into that table, and I want you to scroll until you find that center point. Okay, the point where on both sides it is even or equal. So I want you to notice right here at -3, -8. Notice that as you work above it and work below it, you're getting identical values. So that -3, -8, that means that that is our vertex, okay? So by identifying that center point, like I taught you to start doing yesterday, that means for this graph, oh, I apologize, that -3, -8 is the vertex. The next thing I'm going to have you do is the axis of symmetry. Now the axis of symmetry is super simple. All the axis of symmetry is that x value. The axis of symmetry is this right here, is that line that goes through the vertex. It splits it in half. So the axis of symmetry is the line x equals -3. Okay, that is a vertical line that splits the parabola in half. So for that, you always just simply take the x value of the vertex, but to write it as a line, you need to actually indicate x equals -3. The domain of these things is always super easy. So the domain are any possible x values. But if you remember for these, that's always all real numbers. You can put in any x value you want to a quadratic, any number into a quadratic, and it'll always give you an answer. So for domain, you can always use any number. Now the difficult task comes in when you're talking about the range, the possible y values. That's going to be based on this point here. It's going to be based on the vertex. And again, for a range, we're talking about y values. Now, what I want you to notice is we're starting down at that -8, okay? We're starting at the y value of the vertex, okay? Because again, range is always talking about y's. So we're starting at that -8, and where are all of my values? Well, all my values are greater than that -8. So my range are all of my y values that are greater than or equal to that -8. This time I am restricted. I'm not seeing anything less than that. Okay, So those are going to be the four things that you're answering for every one of these. Those are the four vocabulary terms. Now, if you notice at the bottom of the page, I do have step-by-step instructions of what I just said. So we're going to have two more examples to go through, but I do want you to understand that when you're doing this on your own, you're doing the practice work, do reference that step-by-step guide that I've put at the bottom. But for now, let's go and do some of our own examples. So I'm going to go into my calculator to do my first example. So I go back to y equals, clear out an equation if there's already one there, and I'm going to type this in. X squared plus 4x minus 1. Type it in, and now I'm going to go to my table. And I'm looking for that center point. I'm looking for the vertex. So, and I see right here this -2, -5. Okay, because above that -5 and below that -5, I'm getting all the same values. So those are going to be the values that I write down. So I'm starting at that -2, -5. That's kind of my special center point. Then I'm going to do 2 points above it, and I'm going to do 2 points below it. And now I'm going to graph those. So -2, -5, 3, 4, 5, puts me right down there. Uh, -3, -4, puts me about there. -4, -1, -1, -4, 0, -1. So I plot my points, and again, if you'd like to check on the calculator, just hit graph, and we are getting what we're looking for. All right. So again, so far, that's just the previous notes, okay? So now let's work on the current stuff. Well, the vertex, remember, is that point that I identified, that -2, -5. That center point is my vertex. My axis of symmetry is that vertical line that goes through the vertex. So it goes through that -2. So for the axis of symmetry, you're always taking x equals and then that x value of the vertex. In this case, that -2. The domain is always nice and simple. It is always all real numbers. You can use any number you want. However, the range, the y values, is a little bit different. So the range, you're starting at the vertex. So I'm starting down at that -5, that y value of the vertex. And where am I seeing my values? Well, all of my values are above that -5. So all of my values are equal to or greater than -5 when we're talking about the range, when we're talking about the y values. And again, that is what you're going to have to be able to answer when you're working on these questions for me. So let's do one more just to make sure you're getting a hang of it. And so you can see a negative parabola. So first thing I'm going to do, I'm going to go to my calculator and I'm going to graph it. So I go into y equals, clear out anything that's there, and I'm going to type it in. So -x squared plus 6x minus 2. I'm going to go to my table because the first thing I need to do is I need to find that center point. I need to find that vertex. Well, here, obviously, I'm a little bit too high, a little bit too low, so I'm going to scroll down a little bit to my values start leveling out. All right. And here we go. So that center point I'm seeing at 3, 7, because above the 7 and below the 7, it starts repeating itself. That is that symmetric point. So that's where I'm going to start my table at 3, 7. I'm going to take a point above, or 2 points above, 2 points below, and those are going to be the points that I plot. So 1, 3 puts me right there. 2, 6, 3, 7, 4, 6, 5, 3. I connect those. And then it's always a good idea, just a quick check to make sure you've done this right. Use a calculator to graph it. I'll get rid of that little line I made. And that is the graph that you're seeing. So that means that we've set this up properly. So the vertex, remember the vertex is always that center point. Okay, the vertex is a maximum point right there that begins my symmetry. Speaking of symmetry, to get that line of symmetry, remember you're always taking the x value from the vertex. All right, and to write it as an actual line is x equals 3. For the domain, again, the domain is nice and easy. You can use any x value you want. Any x value will work in these. So I get all real numbers, but my range. For my range, I'm starting at that 7. Okay, I'm starting thinking of y values, but this time notice all my values are less than that 7. So when we're dealing with the y values, if all my y values are less than or equal to that 7, that is how I'm going to notate the range. Y is less than or equal to that 7. And again, that's always coming from the y value of the vertex. All right, so please make sure you have this written down, and then please ask if you have any questions.